His Only Case of Murder. A Locked Room Mystery by Malcolm Noble. Episode 1. The best copper I've ever known was an old pipe smoker I'll call Bub. He worked a country beat, a dozen miles from the nearest sergeant, and devoid of any crime simple enough for Bub to deal with. Rich man's thievery is nothing to do with us, he told me more than once. Now and then detectives from CID or Special Branch would call at his modest police house, and Bub or his wife will tell them enough local gossip to keep his job, but not enough to disturb the peace. We're here to frighten no horse nipper. A toffee-nosed chief super had thought it would do a young constable good to spend some time with Bub, so I was attached to him for 8 weeks in '56, 8 weeks when I learned more about policing than 30 years anywhere else. He knew which books to sign and logs to keep, and where to leave his footprints so that visiting sergeants couldn't afford the evidence that this country copper was doing a first-class job. I remember the night when we dressed up like smugglers and drove a borrowed green Landy to the middle of a plantation and loaded it with Christmas trees ordered at a cut price by officers throughout the police division. "A couple of these are going to the ACCs, so it must be above board," said a worried Bub. The truth is, there wasn't a dishonest hair on Bob's grey head. But he had his own way of doing things. Once a village landowner complained in writing that heavy trucks were rattling down parish back roads where they weren't allowed. Bub pasted the letter in his journal and said, "No one gives me more trouble than this pompous twerp." That night we sat outside the squire's house, drinking from a thermos flask and waiting for the right sort of lorry to trespass on the little lane. When that happened, Bub told the driver to keep his engine running, very loud in the night I remember, as he took down the particulars. Then, when the motor was all but overheating, he told him to turn it off while they chacked a back wheel together. After we had left, the driver was 20 minutes trying to get the beast going again. The gumpy squire slept little that night. All that happened 2 days before we found our body. I say our because Bub and I have lived off the story for so many years that it feels like we've taken possession of the corpse. He was Noakes Hoyland, a retired archaeologist, 18 stones and fighting fit. Bub said he was a local celebrity who rarely ventured out of his riverside house. The place wasn't easy to get to. Although Bub and I got the call at 7:20 on a Tuesday evening, it was 8 o'clock before Hoyland's cross-looking housekeeper opened the front door to us. "Oh, it's you," she said, not letting us in. "Of course it's me, Aggie," answered Bub. "You asked for a policeman, didn't you?" "I don't want you. Go away, and tell him to send someone else." "Now, Aggie, I'm your local Bobby. They've got no one else to send, so come on, what's the trouble here?" She allowed us to step inside, and without further direction, Bub started to climb the staircase. "Don't go thinking that I've forgotten what you did to me, because I haven't. Turn left at the top, and his study's at the far end." She looked over her shoulder. "Keep up, young man." "What can you tell me, Aggie?" Bub persisted. "There was banging and shouting, and all sorts of crashes. 'Lock the door,' I heard him yell, 'and don't let the bugger out.'" "There was a fight in here?" We were standing outside the study. "And you locked them both in? Crike, Aggie, we'll probably find one of them dead." That's what we did find, of course. We stepped into a room designed for shadows, with 2 pairs of wall lights and furniture placed so that flames from the grate threw shapes across the ceiling and varied the colours of the upholstered armchair. Things had toppled over during the disturbance. A typewriter, an antique globe, a heavy occasional table with a horse's head for its pedestal, but nothing had been broken. The professor's desk, with papers opened at a work in progress, hadn't been touched. This den would always be untidy. Ornate canes, a shooting stick, and 2 telescopes had been left leaning against the lacquered doors of a tall cupboard, and a pile of books needed to be returned to the shelves. The professor was sprawled, face down, on the oriental rugs that covered the floor. There was no blood on his corduroys or his tweed jacket with frayed cuffs, but he was dead for sure. No one else was in the room, and the only window was barred. "We need John Dixon Carr," I said. Bub didn't answer. "He solves locked room mysteries," I explained meekly. "There ought to be a South American blowpipe somewhere." Bub was kneeling beside the body, checking details without touching. He looked up at me. "I forgot, you're a self-taught detective." He had a murder on his hands and wanted to do things right. My clever remarks weren't welcome. "There's one above the desk," Addy chipped in testily. "The professor always said it was too small to be genuine. Mind, it works well enough." I nodded. "Death in the Clouds, Agatha Christie." "There's no note," said Bub. "Is that his fault?" Aggie scowled. "You want him to write the killer's name in blood?" "Sign of 4, Conan Doyle." I was wrong, of course. I should have said Study in Scarlet, but I thought I'd better not put it right. Bub got to his feet. He fished a pipe from his pocket and stuck it in his mouth. It wasn't lit. It was there to settle his nerves and help him think. "Aggie, you and I are going to leave the young'un here while I get a proper investigation going." I stopped him, closing the study door. "Hey, Bub, you can't shut me in here with a dead body." "I'm not going to drag a chief superintendent from his bed only to find that the body has got up and walked off. Stay here and guard him." "But he can't run off. He's dead." "Then he'll do you no harm, Nipper." I heard Aggie say, "Don't expect tea," as I walked along the landing. I sat on the edge of the armchair, a little to one side so that I could see the body. He wasn't going to talk to me, so I said to him quietly, "I'm here if you want me." I gave a little cough. Then I squeezed my nose and pushed hard, like you do when you want your ears to pop. Strange the things you do when you watch over a murdered man. In the middle of these exercises, the telephone rang. Gingerly, anxious that I could be destroying important fingerprints, I reached across the desk and lifted the receiver. "Have you done it, Bub? Have you killed him?" I said not a word, but at that moment I was sure of two things. Bub was no murderer, and the professor's killer was still in the room. That's the end of episode 1.